But we're starting off with Dr. Julie Schneider, the director of the Rush ADRC, and she's going to be speaking about why demographic representation is key for our research, especially in relation to brain autopsy and brain tissue. So take it away, Julie.
Thank you, Crystal, and thanks for inviting me to start this off. I really feel like I'm preaching to the converted already. We've had 2 days of hearing such great talks about and motivating all of us for diversity, equity, and I feel as if, you know, I'm like ready to go out and start as a neuropathologist, go and get people into our studies. But anyway, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the autopsy and why it's important. Okay, so we have a lot of neuropathologists in this room, so it's no, it's not surprising to any of you guys about how Alzheimer's disease was first discovered by Dr. Alzheimer, and he found it in a woman in her 50s, so it was pre-senile, and really until Roth, Tomlinson, Blessed started looking at older persons' brains, it was really thought that Alzheimer's disease was a disease of young people. It was atypical, it was uncommon. So you can't see what you don't look for, right? So they weren't looking at older people's brains, and the terms in the past were senility, hardening of the arteries, when you get old, it's just getting old, when you have memory problems. So it really took autopsies to really move the field forward. And then, of course, we know that plaques and tangles became synonymous with Alzheimer's disease and with memory loss and dementia and aging. And there was a floodgate of research with the discovery of amyloid beta, of course, paired helical filament tau. And there's an array of other things that happened because we had brain tissue. We discovered APP, we discovered the secretases. These were all things that led to treatment trials that maybe just now is starting to work, hopefully. It led to these studies of lipoprotein E and autosomal dominant diseases that we're looking at now. It led to mouse models of, and other models of Alzheimer's disease, and now anti-amyloid for in vivo biomarkers, which is pretty amazing when you really think about it, that we have an in vivo biomarker for Alzheimer's disease pathology. And this all stems from actually looking at the brain. So what happened over time with brain donation is we continue to enroll older people in longitudinal studies. And we got more clinical information, and we got more well-characterized brains over the past couple decades. And you're probably pretty sick of seeing this slide by now, but on the top panel was a study that we did in over, how long ago is that now? 13 years ago. On the top panel is when we were looking in the brains of the Religious Order Study and Memory and Aging Project, which are longitudinally enrolled studies where people enroll in the study without dementia or known dementia. We follow them yearly with cognitive testing, and then they donate their brain at the time of death. So this was the first some number of brains. It wasn't, it's, you know, in the hundreds. And what we found is that the people that we were calling Alzheimer's disease actually had all these other pathologies in their brain. So the light blue on that top panel is showing probable Alzheimer's disease. The light blue is people who just had the Alzheimer's pathology. The other color blues are Alzheimer's plus something. And it was really surprising how much other pathologies were present in these people that we were calling Alzheimer's disease. And in the field at the time, there was also this thought that the neuropathologist could tell you what was causing the dementia. So if there's a little infarct in the brain, you would say this was predominantly a dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. I don't know how we're supposed to know that, but we somehow were able to tell. So we were very surprised when we looked at what these other pathologies were doing, and we found that they actually are worsening people's cognition. They weren't benign. We used to think when I first started in pathology, if you saw a little, couple lacunar infarcts, was no big deal. With microinfarcts, we really thought it was no big deal. I mean, that was just like, that's so tiny, it couldn't possibly be a problem. So unless you look for it, unless you actually look for it and analyze it, I think you just don't know what you're missing. And what happened is over the next 9 years or so, we continued to collect more data. So on the bottom panel is a project I did with Olivia Capasi, who's in the room, and Charlie DeCarli. We were asked to write a paper for Acta Neuropathologica, just a review. And I thought, oh, this is a great opportunity just to throw in this other pathology and show what we've been seeing. And so I asked the editor, can I go ahead and add some new data collection? And he said, sure. So this is what we came up with. And now you can see when you add in microinfarcts and 3 kinds of vessel disease, small vessel, which is arteriolar sclerosis, amyloid angiopathy, large vessel, which is atherosclerosis, and TDP, which we now call late, that everybody has pathology in their brain. And I just put up here the mild cognitive impairment and the probable AD, but you would see also that if I showed you the no cognitive impairment, there's a fair amount of pathology there too. But look at the little sliver over there, that's the Alzheimer's disease, the little light blue sliver, you make it out, right above the yellow. So that's pure Alzheimer's disease. So most Alzheimer's disease we see in the community when people die about the age of 90, so they're quite a bit older, admittedly, have vascular or other neurodegenerative disease in their brain, either Lewy bodies or TDP. They almost all have vascular disease. If you consider at least moderate, small or large vessel disease, or any infarcts in their brain. So tremendously common pathologies. We wouldn't have known that if we didn't look for them and report on them. What else are we missing that's in the brains of older? We are missing things, right? We're missing PART, and we're missing RTAG here, and we're missing the things that we see on imaging, which enlarged perivascular spaces, which the imagers do better than we do. White matter hyperintensities, we're not putting that here. There's a lot going on, and if we don't look for it, if we don't study it, I don't think we can conquer what's happening with aging. And it's not just amyloid. I think something with it, something that would reduce amyloid certainly would be very important in my opinion. It's certainly pivotal for a lot of these neurodegenerative diseases, but there's a lot of other things happening in the aging brain.
To build those relationships, to maximize those assets.
So the other thing to mention, I already alluded to this, is that people without cognitive impairment who die and their last testing being around 6 months prior to death, and they're tested as normal, also have a fair amount of pathology in their brain. There's a lot of vascular, there's a fair amount of Alzheimer's. We used to get arguments from the clinicians saying, well, you guys, if we would have examined them later, we would have picked this up. They really do, they really weren't normal. If you got their autopsy too late. Like they really weren't normal. So it wasn't really till PET came out, I think, that people really started believing, some people probably still don't believe, but people started really believing that you had this preclinical disease and that this pathology was slowly accumulating over time, and that you could be walking around just like you can with heart disease or with cancer, that you can walk around with these pathologies and not be exhibiting symptoms from it. And that was very new. In pathology, it was very controversial, seeing this much pathology in the brain of a normal person. And it led really to this whole new field of resilience now, which is tremendously important, right? Because if we have this much pathology, how are we going to continue? We can try to get rid as much as we can. We rather not have the pathology at all, of course, but I'd rather be the person resilient than not resilient if I do have the pathology. And I want to know, how can I be more resilient? And all of us want to know that, right? So we can't change our genetics necessarily, but we can do other things. We can be cognitively active, we can do physical activities. I know that's still controversial too. But there's a bunch of things that have been related in our studies and in other studies to this resilience. Things like well-being and purpose in life. The diet, you heard about the exposome, just the last lecture. We've heard about inflammation, what's happening around these plaques. And now we know inflammation is so important because of the genetics. So a fascinating new area that got opened up really partly due to getting brains on people. So just a couple other things to point out. So I talked about, it was originally thought to be a pre-senile dementia. Now, then it became a senile dementia. Alzheimer's became a mixed pathology now. It used to be just plaques and tangles. Now it's plaques, tangles, and a bunch of other stuff. I mentioned the subclinical dementia pathology. So Alzheimer's disease has gone through this whole road of change over the past 2 decades because of what we've seen in the brain and well-characterized older people being studied. So one of the things that happens to us when we look at brains is that we begin to think we know what we're seeing and that it reflects the whole community. So when I was doing a pathology rotation and I was like my first year, I thought if you had a really bad cough, you probably had lung cancer because that's all you saw when you have your autopsy service. Coughs were lung cancer because you don't do autopsy on people who just have the flu usually, So you only can make inferences from what you see. So we were very interested in the Religious Order Study of Memory and Aging project on what we're seeing in the community versus what you see in a clinic, and they're very different. So, and I think a lot of you probably are aware of this already, but we published this in 2009, and here you can see it. This was our clinic. I think this has a, there it goes. This was our clinic cohort. This is the Religious Order Study of Memory and Aging project. They're much older. Religious orders have a lot of education. We tend to see people when they pass away with their brains, we tend to see them and they're much less impaired than what we see in the clinic. So you can see that what the mini mental status is in the community. This is our clinic, 7.3. You can see we get a lot of dementia in the clinic, a lot less in the community. So different cohorts. The other thing to mention is that from a pathologic standpoint, we see more vascular disease in the community. So I think vascular disease was very largely under-recognized for a long time. First of all, it was all Alzheimer's Center, and if you had a little infarct, they said it was Alzheimer's disease and the infarct didn't matter anyway. But even so, in our clinic, we just don't see as much. You don't see as much vascular disease as you do in the community. And you're asking why, I can see that question coming in.
I didn't want to interrupt, but how much of it is because they're actually actively excluding people with vascular? I don't know.
So that's a great question. That's part of it. So that is definitely part of it. So the Alzheimer's Center's grants, when I started, used to exclude. You would exclude people who had uncontrolled hypertension. You'd exclude people who had anything more than a lacunar infarct, a hemispheric infarct, excluded. So that's the other thing, is that when you do these clinical studies and you're continually excluding people, who are you left with? What is that representative of, right? So yeah, absolutely, that was part of it, I'm sure. Oh, and then the other thing is that you see a lot more atypical pathology in a clinic. So when you're in a clinic, you're gonna see odd things. You're gonna see more Lewy body disease because it's really hard to live with somebody who's, has behavior issues and sleep issues and REM behavior disorder or behavioral problems from FTD, right? So those are overrepresented in the clinics. And I still see papers that say frontal temporal is the second most common neurodegenerative disease. So it's there. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to point out was that we think about aging in like old people but it's really a big spectrum, right? So we have 65 to 75, 75 to 85, 85. I mean, it's a really long range, right? So it's really interesting to start breaking down older people and think about what age groups and what's happening in these different age groups. So this is from a paper that we wrote looking at people over 90 and under 90. And the bottom line here, and this is from Ross Map again. Oops, sorry. And the bottom line was that we saw tons more mixed pathology in these people over 90. So not surprising, you're getting older and those mixed pathologies are going up. So I don't think that was surprising. And it was really mostly vascular again, because people with Lewy body disease, it stays kind of flat, maybe because of mortality with Lewy body disease. So, and there's been a lot now out on age and Alzheimer's disease, as everybody knows. So it's fascinating to really think about when you see somebody in a clinic and you call it Alzheimer's disease, what's the likelihood of what it is depending on their age? It's very age related. If you have an amnestic disorder in your 70s versus 90s, it's gonna be a little bit less common. So, so we have to think about what age group, and we need to start not thinking about older people as one group, right? Because there's a whole bunch of different age groups and they're aging at different rates. Men versus women, so there's been a lot out there. Again, if you don't look, you don't know. We have started looking at men versus women, and we have seen differences with more mixed pathology with vascular in women and more pure Lewy body disease in men. And Pete Nelson has published on that there's an increase in Lewy body disease. Interestingly, when you talk about diffuse Lewy body disease, we don't see that difference. So it really seems to be a Parkinson's more picture. Here we go. So we are not the only ones who have published this. Lots of you in the room have published these findings. So I just threw up a bunch of other things that have been seen in older people and with different sexes, and there's just a lot of differences across age as well as gender, and unless we look, we just don't see it. That's my main point. And then finally, and I'm going to do a shout out to Lisa Barnes again. What do we know about racial ethnic minorities? And it's crazy how little we know. And kudos to Sanjay for a really great meeting this weekend. It's a team. It was a team, but yeah. And really driving home how bad we are at doing this. And I can tell you, we were talking about this when I started, 2 decades ago, about enrolling and representation and getting, people from different colors and different ethnicities and rural areas. We're just not very good at it, or have not been traditionally very good at it. So this is a study that we did in at Rush, where we looked at a clinic population of Blacks versus whites. And in this particular case, Blacks did have more mixed pathologies. They had more pathologies. They more often had 3 pathologies. That's what I believe the red was, right? No, that's AD Lewy bodies. It's the red is all. Yeah, all. So in the red, in the Blacks, they had AD Lewy bodies and infarcts. Those are clinic patients. And then in the whites, you can see the red slice of the pie. That's how many of the whites in our clinic had all 3 of those pathologies. Then if you look at it carefully, you'll see that there was a lot of Lewy body disease. Because the red and the kind of lilac color are all Lewy body disease. And you can see Blacks have more than whites here. And I don't know what that means yet. It could mean a selection bias. Again, people with Lewy body disease tend to go to clinics, and people of color tend not to like going to clinics. So you're more likely to bring your mother or father to a clinic if they're having problems like that. The other thing to mention that's not on this table is they did have more vascular disease. So there was more atherosclerosis and arteriolar sclerosis, even though here there was not more infarcts. Relatively small sample size. And we're really just starting to look, us and others, at what are the differences, neuropathologic differences by race. We've looked at TDP-43 and Lewy bodies. Now other groups have looked at some very similar things. And I think we still don't really know the answer. We think that there's probably more vascular disease, but are we seeing a representative sample of African Americans right now? And which leads me to my next slide. So one of the other issues is representation, right? So, and I don't remember who showed the slide of the triangle, of how much of the triangle that we're cutting off for pathology, which is like the very tip, versus what you're actually enrolling in your studies. So you enroll, you already have what I'll call, wait, I added this before I go to that. I'm gonna do this one first. So what I'm gonna call weird people, we already have weird people in our studies. Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic. That is who we enroll in our studies. They're not representative, right, of the general population, the people in our study. So I decided, this was coined by Henrik Hein, and I can't pronounce the last person's name, but also interesting to say that 80% of study participants are weird, but only 12% of the world's population. Talk about unrepresentative, right? So I decided to coin a new term called weirder. So weirder is, we get brains that are even rarer. So what are we getting? Because we don't enroll everyone for brain donation, right? The people who tend to donate their brains tend to be the people that have more unusual problems. Like, what did mom really have? You don't really think it's Alzheimer's disease? Well, what was it? So people just don't donate just to donate for science. It's not that common. I mean, here and there. That's why we really need to go out there and get the brains and really make sure that they're representative, because that is what's going to propel the future science in the area. So now I'm going to go back to this one, because I've really learned a lot having Lisa and Crystal now at our center. And I think it's really hit home for me. We act as if, oh, let's just get some Black people in, or Latino people. But just like not all white people are alike, not all Black people, not all Latino people are alike. And I think we need to start thinking differently about how we enroll people and who they are. And I think it's going to be really important. I think people like Crystal, Lisa, and lots of you guys in the room are really going to make a difference in the coming years with this. So I will leave it with weirder, and then and then hand over to Crystal.
All right. Thank you, Julie.
I was joking. I said, are you going to be weird?
Oh, yeah, probably. Can you hear me okay, though? All right. So they're pulling up my slides. I just want to say thank you, Julie, for this. You laid the foundation for why we need diversity within brain tissue. And I hope my talk coming up in a second will kind of talk about what we've been doing and my understanding and inquiry into how to get that started. So I'm up now, y'all. So my work is really thinking about three different aspects. One is, how do we address barriers? The other is, how do we amplify facilitators? And then go on to create intervention strategies or different type of steps that we can implement, and not only at the RADC, but beyond. So before I really get started, I wanted to thank two big groups of people. Of course, all of the diverse community members engaged in research, not only at the RADC, but beyond. and then all of the staff and my colleagues at the RADC who really, all the outreach team, the mixed methods team, none of this would ever really be possible. So thank you. But I wanted to start off formally with how my thinking has shifted over the past 6 or 8 years or so. And there has been discussion about disparity versus equity, diversity, equity, inclusion. But let me just give you something that I published, say, about 5 years ago, with thinking about how do we go from describing, so say, what is a disparity or a difference or an issue, but really join me on the right where we're thinking about number 2. This is where my work rests in having for all older adults striving for healthy aging, but also understanding, treating, and preventing these chronic diseases of aging, but really utilizing what we have in terms of community engagement and educational opportunities to really have special attention or prioritization on particular communities that may be at higher risk. What does that mean? Number 4, really, in allocating resources and using our research as understanding, of course, and solution generation. So that's very important to me. But of course, they're intertwined, but I wanted to kind of lay the foundation from where I'll be coming from. So I am the leader of the ORCOR at the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center, but I'm also an applied social psychologist and mixed methodologist. So the way that we thought about our goal is really what are we trying to do with cultivating inclusive, but really engaged, so not just taking things from people, but how can we have this bi-directional relationship built on trust to get diverse persons or people from demographically diverse backgrounds to be in our aging research so we can understand etiology, pathogenesis, ultimately treatment and prevention of ADRD. So when I first joined the ADRC, I noticed the most critical issue of what I call it. So to our left, we have postulation that people who represent 2 big, large racial ethnic groups in the United States, Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, being at higher risk of developing Alzheimer's and other dementias. But on our right, we see that really at any point from outreach and engagement, there's more that we can get in touch with or have a tab on. But as we get to cross-sectional, longitudinal, Lord forbid, clinical trials, the percentage of participation just narrows. So even with outreach and engagement, we do our best, but it's still not as representative or the wide swath that we're looking for. Nowhere is this more apparent than brain donation. So I wanted to walk you through some of the numbers here. So at the RADC, we have 5 big cohort studies. 2 focus predominantly or exclusively on African American Black populations, 1 Latino, and the others are more mixed, but white predominantly. But looking at brain donation, you can see at the top that over 3,000 non-Latino whites have said yes when they consented to brain donation. That means once I pass, I'm okay with having my brain procured. If you look in the lower right, we had completed brain autopsies for almost 90% of those individuals, okay? But when we go to non-Latino Blacks, even the number of consented is less than half of what we have for whites. But then join me in the right-hand corner. We only really procure about 50% of those brains, or we only have brain autopsy there. So that's signaling to me, looking at this when I first came in, that not only, I'll go back, that we have fewer people, Black, but we know that already, but even when they consent, that we are seeing a loss of procuring or having those brain autopsies. And then in Latinos, the number's even smaller for consent, but the percentage is a little bit better for completed brain autopsies, but still less than non-Latino whites. So digging into the literature and thinking about what I know, from a more psychosocial aspect, is thinking that this is something that we need. Brain donation, of course, diagnosis ADRD still requires autopsy, but we have these low participation rates. And I highlight Black and Latino adults as those communities are very rich in our Chicagoland area, so it's a big focus of mine, and just personally as well. But these are despite our persistent efforts. So it's not that we're not doing something, it's just we're still not seeing that return on investment with that. But being out and about with ORCOR, really noticing that there are two big sets of sensitive topics. One is the process of how do I even consent to being a brain donor for research? How is it different? And then what's the information gained? What are you guys at the center really gaining from having my brain? But then the other part is, okay, even if I'm all right with that, what's the process of brain autopsy and how will that be when I need to be interred or buried? My final rites. So, but ultimately, if we do not see representation and we see such low numbers, we do have a severely limited understanding of ADRD within demographically diverse communities. And when I say demographically diverse, I don't just mean non-white. What I mean is just all the intersections that may be there from gender, race, geographic location, immigration status, and beyond. We haven't even scratched that surface, but just pinging that. But really that limited availability of brain tissue, we're unable to apply or generalize what we already know, everything from pharmacological discoveries all the way to do our educational materials even work or jive well. So just to ping you to some gaps in the literature, disregard the first one, that's not really true. We do have a lot of literature about people declining, but it's to show that we do need the flip side, meaning why do people consent? And then also, what are impediments to actually procuring? So people can consent, but then it's not them that's going to come to the autopsy. I mean, you have to rely on someone else to bring them there, obviously. So my thought as a mixed methodologist was that we need to understand what are the community and participant perspectives from a high fidelity point of view, but then use quantitative data that we have a lot of at the RADC to develop fuller profiles of these individuals. It's not so much of say, oh, I'm Black and I said yes. It's much more than that. What's the activity I'm taking part in? What's my familial structure? So that sort of thing, that's the phase that we're in now. I'll tell you about that in a second. But then go on to scale up beyond the RADC for culturally competent materials, strategies, and efforts. So one way that I thought to do this was to start off with, and I'm always curious about social cognitive processes, that just simply means how people make sense of themselves, others, and the environment that they are in. So say we're here now, I'm thinking about my presentation, I may be thinking about how you may receive it, but also I know that we are at the Fall ADRC meeting. Ultimately, I can make a decision based on the situation, what I think about it, also how I feel about it, but then what will I ultimately do? So that's the real crux of social cognitive processes. So with that, I developed a two-phase sequential mixed methods research design. We call it HERD, Health Equity Through Aging Research and Discussion. And it's a two-pronged approach, really two-pronged purpose. Is one, to identify specific factors that serve as either barriers or facilitators to brain donation, but really focused on the three groups at the bottom: Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, but really whites with lower income, because even the folks that we have who are white are of higher education, higher retirement income. So that could be just a little bit of a difference there. But really what I was most interested in was hearing about the barriers from people who have not consented and hearing about the facilitators from people who have said yes. So it's a 3x2 design. So you have the different racial ethnic groups, but also if they said yes or no. I'm not interested in hearing particularly about a facilitator from someone who has not agreed just yet, because it's hypothetical. So I wanted to hear from persons who have made that decision right now. So we started off with phase one, which is qualitative, then going on to scale up to have fuller profiles and larger sample size with quantitative. And now we are developing a survey instrument to say, qualitative is time intensive, quantitative of course, but then how can we get these big factors out to really say how can we spread this to the other ADRCs. So I will walk you through the data that we have now for each phase. But I will rest heaviest on the qualitative piece. I put this recruitment funnel up for the qualitative piece just so you can kind of see how much effort it even takes, or the touch points, to even get 45 individuals to take part in focus groups. We started off with a pool of over 400 African Americans, over 100 older Latinos, and about 44 whites or lower income. Then we were only able to schedule or contact 177, schedule and confirm 54. Then we still lost some the day of, but then we ultimately had 45. I can talk more about the sampling algorithm, so 45 is okay for qualitative with that work, but just to show you the level of impact that is needed to touch to even get to those groups. Okay. This gives you a snapshot of qualitative participants. So as you do see, they are, mid to later 70s, but also highly educated, especially for older Black and Latino adults. So really, these are the folks that we are seeing. These are the folks who are asking to speak with us about it and being okay to discuss their decisions. So we started off with barriers. To me, barriers are less interesting because we have so much data on it and we're kind of clear. So I just at least wanted to put an ode to it to say, but we had several barriers that came up, 4 to be precise, and it is in a paper that I cited on the previous slide, so you don't have to worry too much about that. But one of the biggest pieces is exposure and education. So people who said no to brain donation and is bifurcated on the right-hand side by race and ethnicity is simply saying, well, what's the purpose of research overall? But in more particular, what's the purpose of brain donation in relation to research? How is brain donation going to add to the cognitive battery, the psychosocial measures, et cetera, that I am completing? But then people were also just confused at the bottom. Well, on my license, I'm an organ donor. Won't you get my brain then? And so it's a little bit different for brain donation for research, so having that information. But really on the right, we see that Black adults really lack knowledge regarding, and these are people who are in research. So that tells you we're talking to a rarefied group even. But even these individuals are saying, okay, I'm in research, I want to help, I want to do this and really contribute, but what is the link to giving my brain to research and how will you use it to benefit my family and the future? But then also they just have a least exposure to really digging into those issues. So something I found fun was facilitators of brain donation, people who have said yes. So we have 4 big hits here, but one I want to call your attention to is at the top, family and the future. Family served as a barrier and as a facilitator. So for people who said no, they were just saying, well, my family is not on board with this, I want to discuss it, and we've decided no. These individuals here said, I am doing it for my family and the future. Even though if you see the 3rd point in that top box, they are discordant most likely from their family, meaning I've said yes, I've consented, but my family's not okay with that. They're not necessarily on board. But something else that we have here is that these folks are highly active, always looking to ascertain more knowledge. So they see research as just a way of getting more knowledge. So they're seeing themselves as gaining from us. Like when you tell us about Alzheimer's disease or different ways that we may reduce hypertension, that is a benefit to them that they think that they're participating in this research with brain donation just as a piece. But something at the bottom is we talk a lot in the literature about trust, religion or spirituality, but they said that they really want to donate their brains to fulfill a more spiritual mandate, like to help their neighbor. This is a call out here from the top theme. And as you can see to the right, how it kind of breaks down, I wanted you guys to have that just for your own knowledge, and it'll be on the NAC YouTube channel. But Black adults were really thinking about themselves as a community member and defining themselves by the roles that they have in their family, mother, daughter, sister, aunt, etc. So they were seeing it as their obligation or their responsibility to do the best that they could for research so they could ameliorate dementia in their communities and facilitate healthy aging. Similar to Latinos, but they really were in the caregiver role, these participants, and they were very hell-bent on saying, I do not want other members of my family to go through what I've gone through with caring for a loved one with dementia or before. So it was something that's very salient to them, even in that moment. So here, we kind of went to, well, once we have the people who have said yes, And we want to know, well, why are we still seeing less likely to get the brains? What are impediments to brain autopsy? So we went back to say, well, what are some things that you think will be a barrier to getting the brain? Not you consenting, but once you pass away. And at the bottom, older Black and Latino adults, it was all about the family. Slightly different. So Black adults were saying, well, my family is not bought in even at the onset, so I've just gone against the grain. But older Latinos were saying they're with me on this, but I just fear that the grieving process will be so overwhelming that they may just forget to do it, or it will not be prioritized. So to the right, in the manuscript at the bottom, we set forth different strategies to address these different sorts of impediments before they happen. So really what we've been implementing at the RADC is family as participant. So of course the person has to consent. We're not taking away anyone's autonomy, but we do ask, would you like someone else here to discuss this with you, or would you like to share your decision-making with, say, someone, in your family or a loved one? But we also not just talk about brain donation, but what does it mean for your loved one to be in the research studies? What are they doing exactly? What are we collecting from them? What are we doing with those data? And how are we using it to diminish the impact of ADRD in these communities? But then also we draw the link to say, what's the role of research in brain donation more specifically? So we can list all the tests or the different areas, but we try to link them to the overarching goal of research, brain donation, and then understanding the link between what happens while someone's alive to once they pass away and what we see. And so this is a continuous process of family education, especially around the process of brain autopsy. So myself and my other colleague, Dave Marquez, he leads the Latino Core. We were able to get a little money to look at perspectives of adult Latino children. So let's hear from the children, since adult children, since they say family is so important, what are their perspectives? And sure enough, highlighted in the center for you, they were saying in order for us to get on board is really, we need more information about the brain donation process, consenting, as well as once someone passes away. And then really, what's the difference between organ donation and brain donation for research? So they're kind of overlapping with what their loved one is saying. So they're indicating, if you want us on board and you want us to facilitate that process, these are the things that we need to know. And their recommendations to us was to increase the education about the process of brain autopsy, making sure that we emphasize that no one will be able to tell that the brain has been taken or has an autopsy, and that the person will look like they want them to look once they are buried, that it will not stop their plans at all, but also make it relatable, family-centered, what does it mean to them, and raise awareness about brain donation. So after that, we came even further back to the drawing board to think about these strategies for what we can implement. So something we do now is we provide a brain donation packet with all of the information that I just highlighted to each participant who agrees to brain donation for research. So we talk about it, and the research assistance coordinators are very just elegant with this, that they can tell if someone does not want to discuss it further, you can stop. But then there's soft yeses or soft maybes, and then there are yeses. So if people say, well, I'm not opposed, but maybe come back, then we revisit it during the next study visit, whenever that is. And we bring the packet, we leave it each time. But for the people who say yes, we ask for their funeral home information simply so it's an ease of process, meaning we don't have to call a loved one to say, can we please perform the autopsy? That way we just work with the funeral home director and it's seamless, and return the body back for internment. We also send letters to the funeral homes about the RADC participant, and we have them, not only are they signing informed consent, but specifically a Uniform Anatomical Gift Act. And then really looking to do what I've been really harping on for the past 2 days, is increasing not only our demographic, but methodological diversity. What are other ways of knowing the participant perspective and taking that information to understand and leverage with other groups? We started that here, we've published on it, but really taking even further now to develop strategies from qualitative work, okay? To ultimately co-design and co-strategize throughout the research process. So we're not going back retroactively, but maybe we can start from the beginning. So I have no idea why that font is like that, but nevertheless, now we are in the quantitative phase where I take the qualitative themes, sub-themes, and codes, and this was like a year-long process of matching them to each and every quantitative measure that we have to say what are proxies there that we can now run models to say, outside of race, outside of, say, income status, what are the other aspects or correlates of people saying yes or no to brain donation. And we're seeing some beautiful hits on what I call the 3 acts: social, physical, and cognitive activity. That manuscript is in development, so I'll leave that out for now. And then also we're simultaneously developing a survey instrument that stems from our both qual and quant work. So we have survey questions that operationalize the qualitative and then target our meaningfully or statistically significant quantitative findings. So our first step is we're going to distribute to a subsample at the RADC, and then we'll go from there. Okay, but the plan is to maybe see that in years to come across the ADRCs. Here's a highlight of some of the topics that are being highlighted, especially role of family, spirituality and religion, and trust. So this just gives you sort of a full circle for the HERT study, completed the qualitative, almost done with quant, working on the survey to really just say we want to increase brain donation consent, but even more so eliminate impediments to completed brain autopsies, particularly among older Black and Latino adults. So I believe we do welcome questions now, depending on the time. I do have some discussion questions. If we fall short, I'll leave those up. But I think now we can open up the floor for any questions for Julie or myself, and to talk through some of this with the focus on building strategies.
And just, sorry, as a little notice, there's a button on all of these mics that you push and the light turns green. So make sure you do that before you ask a question so that the virtual people can hear you.
And are you gonna pull up the chat so we can see them? Yeah, okay.
I had a quick question.
Sure.
Since most of your qualitative sample was from women, are you worried that any of the domains will not hold up in male donors?
Oh my goodness, yes. Across most racial ethnic groups, women just are the ones that are more likely to participate, at least in the research. So we have been developing ways to draw men in particular to the study. So it was kind of corny, but it was an initiative called like barbers for brains or bikes for brains. We were trying to play with different things, but yes, that is a concern. But in the larger sample on the quantitative side, we are able to have more men. So we are able to see if there are any gender differences as well. That's why the quantitative piece is so important. But I think the qualitative gives us a ping to what is going on and where we can delve further. But we do need that male perspective, and also beyond that, quite frankly. But this is just, say, a start there.
Is that pointing to me on the screen? I don't know if people can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, thanks for the talk. It was quite interesting. It was noticeable to me that in your study, even though you started with a very small number of your older whites, the yield of them participating was an order of magnitude larger than for either of your other 2 groups. You started with about, you got almost a third from them and well less than, closer to 10% for the other groups, it would seem. So a factor of 3, maybe not an order of magnitude. Were you able to learn anything specific about how even that difference was driven?
Yeah, so part of the reason why I put up the recruitment funnel is so you can be able to see that as well. Sometimes we do think of qualitative as, say, someone would want to engage in that, or if it's less rigorous. But when you have such a pointed research question with very developed methods, it is, say, like a quantitative study, in that you have to really go after the sample and the groups that you want to hear from. It was harder to discuss. I'll give you an example. We did have someone pull out on the day of in the focus group. And even then, this is a person who said no, and nothing would change. It's just saying, I want my daughter here with me even to discuss my decision. I don't even feel comfortable discussing a decision that I've made because I don't want to stir it up. And then sometimes, even among the people who said yes, it was more of amplification of why they said yes. But on the barrier side, it was not necessarily taboo, but older Black and Latino adults were less likely to want to vocalize why they said no, if that makes sense. So they've made the decision, and that can change, but at the time they've made the decision, but they did not want to share what went into that decision. Dirk?
Hey, yeah, you guys can hear me, okay? So, Crystal, that's just really amazing and really enlightening. What you guys are doing is truly fantastic. I must admit, as a neuropath core leader, sort of pure and simple, we're kind of dependent upon the enrollment of our centers and the cohort studies, and that can be a little bit challenging because you get a bit of a helpless feeling. But what we've done a couple things. One is for some of the outreach, actually having the neuropathologist or somebody from the neuropath core participate in some of the outreach events to be able to tell people about the kinds of things that you're finding are really important and on people's mind, right? What are we going to learn and what's actually going to happen when this all goes down? And so I think it's really good if the OREs out there in the centers can engage with their neuropath cores and invite the neuropathologist to, we're down in the basement, usually behind our microscopes and stuff, but we like to go outside and see people. And I think it's been some of the most rewarding stuff that I've done. The other thing I wanted to say is, getting back a little bit to this neurobiobank thing, and also we're part of a new brain initiative effort called the Brain Initiative Cell Atlas Network, where most of the donors are going to be coming through medical examiner offices, right? These are not people, these are for neurotypical brains, pristine controls that are going to be used to map the normal adult and actually pediatric brain cell atlas and connectivity. And we're really struggling on that end of things as well. And so it's not so much being able to access people who are dying in diverse communities. We have been able to collaborate with our medical examiners, and if someone dies, depending on how they die, they go through the medical examiner process. And I'm sure there's bias even in how people are selected to go to a medical examiner, et cetera, that we need to deal with. But once we are able to identify potential brain donors, it's been striking how difficult it is in people from underserved backgrounds, African Americans and Latinos particularly, to be able to get someone to agree to donation. And I think that's part of that is because people from those communities aren't reaching out in our center right now. We don't have people that are engaged, but my point is, my question, I guess, is how do we do what you're doing, but for the broader community, for the broader population, right? I mean, some of the stuff that Andy showed earlier about, Nina's been really involved with quite a few of the sort of updates on brain donation and brain donation information on the NIH websites, which have been very helpful. But how do we engage with these communities beyond what we're doing in our centers, hopefully, which is great, but is only accessing a small component. And brain research really needs these communities we need to be able to get into these communities to explain what we're doing so that people understand the value of brain donation and make an informed decision. And I'm not sure how to do that.
Well, I think I'll start off by answering at least the first part, and then I'll kick it to Julie for some. But I do think what we can learn from our centers and from our center in specific is that, to answer or address the very beginning, is that we enjoy such a collaborative relationship between ORCOR, Neuropath, data, biostats, et cetera, that we are all at least somewhat aware of the issues that are there and trying to collaborate to make that happen. What does that mean? Is that we will have different folks from the other cores to come out and to speak about exactly these different issues. What does this mean for brain donation? What's the process, et cetera? So we're okay there, or at least have something to work from. So I think we have a firm foundation. But there's something that you said that I kind of agree with, but kind of not, that everything we do is community-based, but also being sure that whatever you're putting out there, it doesn't always have to be as congruent culturally as we think, in my opinion. That we have to have people who are trained and culturally competent, inclusive. But I think that we start here with having those skills. What I mean by that is at the center and having those skills. So I think we all can get out there and at least try and start that, or at least collaborate with ORCORs. But the reach beyond the centers, I must admit that I don't have a well thought out answer because I'm still so focused on the centers. So I'll be fully transparent there that I'm thinking of how can we leverage all that we have here to really impact and facilitate healthy aging. So maybe Julie has something there, but that's for me.
And Julie, if I could just comment to that, Crystal, a lot of the information that you presented, I think would be really valuable for the broader outreach, right? Just the knowledge that you're gaining with respect to the questions people have and the understanding or lack thereof of the process. I think just knowing that and being able to get that into some disseminatable medium would be really, really helpful. So sorry, go ahead, Julie.
No, thanks, Dirk. Yeah, for sure.
No, I was just going to say that I also, of course, don't have an answer, but or a necessarily good answer. But I'm wondering if, like in bone marrow transplant, where you're like be the match, if there could be a campaign, I don't know, through the Neurobiobank or through the Alzheimer's Association, some type of campaign that this makes a difference, that we need older people to enroll in these studies and donate. The problem comes that then people start calling us and saying, my mom just passed away and can you take her brain? And what we need are well-characterized people. We need people that we've been following in general, not for all the studies perhaps, right? So maybe for some of these studies where maybe you don't have to do the characterization as well clinically, that could be a mechanism. I don't know what kind of, what kind of publicity or what the Neurobiobank currently does to get through to the people who would donate.
Well, they're just receiving, they're just being contacted. They're not reaching out at all.
So there's no newsletter or there's no outreach per se.
Go ahead. Nina's all over this. Go ahead, Nina.
Yeah, so the outreach is actually done by Tish Hevel, who Dirk mentioned, who runs the Brain Donor Project. And she actually recently got a grant. I think I put Crystal in touch with her, in fact, to try to diversify the people who are willing to donate their brains through the Neurobiobank. And she was also on Science Friday, which brought in a lot of control donations. So we'll see what those turn into. That is definitely a problem with, as you know, brain donation. They're controls when they agree, but then things change. But yeah, there's a considerable amount of outreach, and I've been putting her in touch with a lot of different people to help with that. And I think we may be able to do more through NIA just to get the broader public knowledge. But that Atlantic article that came out that was on the slide Andy showed, that was intended to make the public aware. We worked with Dirk and the Neurobiobank folks to help identify where the greatest needs were for helping people to understand what researchers need. So we're doing more of that, but we're always open to better ways and more of what information is needed and how it can best help everyone trying to get the message out.
Right, because so many people know that you can donate organs through your so something where you could get out that, yes, that's something very, very good to do, but you could also, be doing this other thing that
Yeah.
is gonna help research in the future.
So they addressed that on that Science Friday piece. If you haven't heard it, I strongly recommend taking a listen. And I think it's good, you can let me know, but I think it's really great if you find a way to share it or a clip of it in your outreach in communities so they can hear and see what's going on and what's needed.
Thanks, Nina. And I think we'll give our final question to Reverend Jenkins here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
To your point, I'm an organ donor. To my not understanding, I figure whatever you use. So I think a national campaign is really something that needs to be done in educating. But my targeted question is, when you show the numbers relative to, I think it was 45% of African American completion of pathology. So how do you make sure that that number goes up? So you get my brain, but my brain just sitting there.
Again, I thought, are you talking, so maybe if you could,
The autopsy. Once,
often do we don't get the autopsy?
oh, right. So why aren't we, so I think Crystal addressed that that people die in our studies, and because they don't have family members that have bought into it or know about them being in a study, we never get the phone call. So if the brain isn't sitting anywhere, we just never, person died and we never got the brain.
I mean, so one, you got to court me, basically. You got to court me and my family.
Right.
Okay, that's what you have to do. So I mean, so there's more of a process than just, I want to, donate my brain.
Exactly.
I mean, so really, I don't even think it's a cultural thing. It really is an educational piece that needs to be nationwide, and folks understanding the significance of the benefit of brain donors. Because now I got to talk to my wife when I go home. She'll probably say, take the brain.
Noted. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I think we're right at time. We've had a great discussion, and this will be up, I believe, on the NAC YouTube page in about a week or so. So thank you.
Thank you.